new to us. We are a grassroots organization started really just a few weeks ago, it seems now, a couple of months ago, I think now, where we really got off the ground with a letter to the ministers for Aliyah and for diaspora affairs, something unique to add to the conversation and to the arguments that are going on and the debates that are going on right now. And we have we attracted some 1,700 signatures to that letter. Since then, we've been making announcements on social media, on WhatsApp and elsewhere, bringing more Olim into the loop, into the sort of circle of information about what's been going on with the weekly or more than weekly, sometimes demonstrations, protests, keeping them up to date, keeping them informed, especially those who are maybe less in tune with what's going on in the Hebrew conversation. And these webinars are an opportunity for us to give our members of our community some information with real experts in English, so they can really understand better what's going on and also have the opportunity to put their questions to our guests. So after I've been speaking to our guest for a short while, I will turn it over to questions from you, our community members in this webinar. So please do write those questions into the Q&A, and we will get to those questions later on. So our first webinar guest a couple of weeks ago, just before Pesach, was Dan Meridor, who was obviously not just a prominent politician, a member of Knesset, but also the justice minister involved with the passing of those basic laws in the early 90s, which have been which are essentially the basic laws that in certain ways are being at least the values expressed in those basic laws are under threat by what the government is planning to do. Today we have with us another esteemed guest, really one of the great Israeli experts and explainers about what the hell is going on here and has been going on for the past few months. Professor Suzie Navot, Vice President of the Israel Democracy Institute, a full professor of constitutional and parliamentary law, former faculty member of the Strict School of Law at the College of Management Academic Studies. She has a BA from Tel Aviv University, an MA in Public Policy from the Faculty of Social Sciences at Tel Aviv University, and a doctorate in law from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Professor Suzie Navot, thank you very much for joining us.
Shalom, and thank you. Thank you, Paul, for this introduction, and shalom to you as well. You didn't mention that I am Ole myself.
I didn't know that. So
it's okay.
I didn't get the full
We're all part of the same family, which is very important for us. Okay. Thank you for having me. I would just give you perhaps a brief overview on not only on what's going on, but on the basic facts that you need to know in order to understand what's going to happen in the next weeks, which I do not know, but it will be on the media and you will have to deal with it. So I will give you all I can, all the basic, I think, principles that I can in order to make it easier for you. Now, I think that you all know that we are in a trend in several countries of what we call a rise of populism, populist leaders that take the government, and it's after that it's very difficult to change them. We are witnessing not only a trend of the rise of populism, but also a trend of democratic erosion, meaning that democracies do not die in one day anymore. We do not see violent coups that overthrow a government. Nowadays, democracies wear out very slowly and sometimes even out of sight. You notice slow changes in a country, and when you look at each change and every one of these changes separately, everything looks fine, but it's what we call here in Israel, hakamut osa eichut, the quantity that makes the quality. Now, this trend of populism and of democratic erosion has also made Aliyah into Israel. It's very hard to put a finger on the specific day that this movement made Aliyah in Israel, but there is no doubt that it's here and it's with us and for a few years now. And the problem is that the constitutional structure of Israel, and only of Israel, exposes it to the dangers of populism even more than in any other democratic country. As Paul said before, Israel has no one document known as the Constitution. We have several basic laws that, although they have been granted constitutional status by the Supreme Court, they're very, very easy to amend and very easy to enact. They are not a real constitution, but this basic law actually limit, until today, the power of the government. Because if a regular law enacted by the Knesset infringes upon my rights that are protected in one of these basic laws in a way that is inconsistent with the basic law, then the Supreme Court of Israel may strike down the law and declare it unconstitutional. But it is a very fragile constitution. And it exposes it to the dangers of erosion very much, because in every other country, any country, especially the countries you come from, there are mechanisms, there are tools that decentralize political power. There are checks and balances. For example, there are almost every country in the world, I think there are about 204 countries. So except for 2.5, all of them have a constitution, a rigid constitution that protects human rights and the rules of the game. Or you have a splitting of the legislative authority into two houses. You have the Congress and the House of Representatives. Sometimes you have the right of veto given to a president, like in the US, or you have a federal structure. And sometimes, if you come from Europe, you have international organizations or international courts, such as the European Court of Human Rights or Interamericana in South America. And all of these tools, all of these ideas are part of the checks and balances. But none of them exist in Israel. Israel is unique. I think we all know is unique in many wonderful ways. But Israel is the only country among countries that have been defined as free countries by the Freedom House, is the only country that does not have any tool for the decentralization of political power. Our Knesset has 120 members, you know that, and 61 is all you need to change Israel's basic law. 61 is the magic number. 61 is all you need. It's like the song of the Beatles. All you need is love. Here in Israel, all you need is 61. 61 is all you need to have absolute power, to change the power of the courts, the system of government, to become a non-democratic state, to limit or even to delete any human right. 61 in Israel, and only in Israel, means absolute power. And the only branch that may limit this absolute power is the Supreme Court. And therefore, the Supreme Court and its independence are under attack by this new government and by this new reform, because it's the only branch that may limit the power. Now, let me give you a brief idea of what this judicial reform is about. The judicial reform presented by the Minister of Justice, Levin, comprises 5 main issues, but it's only the first part. He said that he has 4 parts in the judicial reform, and we are only seeing now the first one of it. They want to, they meaning the government, they want to put forward an override clause. And an override clause is a clause in a basic law that will allow a simple majority in the Knesset, 61, to pass legislation, to pass laws that have been already declared unconstitutional by the court. Meaning, if they want to infringe upon my rights, for example, to declare that there will be no more demonstrations in the street because they do not want more demonstrations, no problem. They will pass a law saying, okay, you do not have the right to freedom of speech. And this law will be declared unconstitutional by the court. But if the override clause will be put forward and passed by 3 readings in the Knesset, then they will be able to enact again this law, abridging freedom of speech, for example, by a simple majority. So this is the first issue. The second one is that the Supreme Court will not be able to deal with amendments to the basic laws, meaning that the Knesset, which actually is the branch that enacts basic laws, will be able to enact any basic law whatsoever, dealing with, for example, and nothing to do with reality, of course, I am talking theoretically. For example, imagine that you have a minister that wants to be minister, but because he has been indicted before and he has been convicted, he cannot be a minister. So what's the problem? We will have a new basic law saying that he may be a minister, he may be also the president of the state, and anything can be done. You just have to write a new law and call it basic laws and no judicial review whatsoever. That's the second issue. The third one is that the court will no longer be able to review government decisions on the ground of reasonableness, meaning that the government and all its branches may do whatever they want and how they want to make decisions, even if they are decisions that infringe upon our rights. The fourth is that the legal advisors of the government ministries will be appointed by the minister, meaning that you will have a legal advisor that is actually somebody that you trust and will tell you exactly what you want to hear if you're a minister. And the fifth one is, of course, to take over the Supreme Court, that politicians will appoint the judges. This is the reform. And if you take an overview on the reform, what do all these proposals have in common? They do not deal with what Paul and I need from the courts. They do not deal with the real problems in the judiciary. They deal only with power. The government wants absolute and unlimited power. They would like to eliminate all restrictions upon the legislature today. Of course, the court will not be able to deal with reasonableness of government. The court will not be able to deal with amendment to the basic law. The court, if it declares a law that is unconstitutional, again, the Knesset may, due to the override clause, enact it again. And of course, the judges will be our judges. And when we ask what kind of limit you will have on government and power. We ask via the Minister of Finance, Smotrich, what kind of protection will I have on my rights and freedoms after the reform is passed? The answer the women who asked got was, you can count on us. We will take care of your human rights. And frankly, I do not want my human rights to depend on the goodwill of this or the next government. Human rights are not something that you give to the goodwill of the government. And this is the one thing that all these proposals have in common. The second one is that almost every institution in Israel, which is currently professional and neutral and objective and independent, would be politicized. The judges would be chosen by politicians, which means, of course, political control on the courts, and the legal advisors of the government will be appointed by the ministers. And of course, they want also, this is a part of another program, to decide who will be the chief of staff and who will be the chief of the police, etc., etc. So this is the reform at the moment. Right. If this is not enough, just one more word about the procedure in which this reform is being passed, which is incredible for me. We have witnessed sessions of the Knesset committees of a sort that has never seen before in Israel, okay? Hasty, even brutal, sometimes humiliating, an ongoing contempt and disrespect toward the civil service and the professionals, to the point that it seems to me that the race to the finish line, meaning the rapid passage of this reform, it justifies all means. And for the moment, this reform has been stopped by the Prime Minister, but not forgotten, stopped until the end of the break that we have now in the Knesset. So in 2 weeks' time, we will see what happens with this reform, which is on the table. It has some part of it, meaning that the parts dealing with the judicial review and with the Committee for Election of Judges has already been passed the first reading, and it's prepared already for the second and third reading, meaning that you only need 1 day or 1.5 days in order to pass it as a basic law. And just to conclude, let me tell you that the program, unfortunately, does not deal with the real problems of the legal system, which they exist. Yeah. And for example, and let me just give you one example that I think all of you may know, the time that a criminal proceeding takes in Israel. Cases that take 5, 6, or 7 years in court. And let's speak about the indictment against Netanyahu. It started in 2018. The indictment was filed in 2020 in January. We are now in April 2023. Okay, 3 years already in the court, and we are hearing, I think, the 45 or 50 witness of, I think, almost 300. And still, we are at the beginning of the evidence in the district court. It will take another 2 or 3 years to finish the district court, and then it will go to the Court of Appeals. It will be 6, 7, 8 years. This is not justice for me. And another problem, the last one, that the fact that the High Court in Israel is also the Supreme Court of Appeals. And there is an overflow of cases. Yeah. We do not have enough judges. There is no specific criminal or civil appeal court to leave time for the Supreme Court to deal with important constitutional cases. All this, I think, it's not interesting enough because it deals with the citizens of Israel and not with the power of government. That is what's going on now.
Okay, well, thank you for that extremely comprehensive overview, and I think that's very useful for the many of us who've been puzzling over some of these things. Now, our community members, many of whom are on this call, have been involved in a lot of debates on social media, and they're involved in protesting the judicial overhaul. They have been for many months, and they face backlash from supporters with various supporters of the government with various claims. Some of them you've addressed already. For example, the claim that this will just make Israel more like other democratic countries, which, as you've pointed out, is the exact opposite of the case. But one thing that's often thrown at us by government supporters is that the court has been too activist, it's overreached, and it needs to be reined in some way. And that and I guess different but related to that is that these reforms will make the justice system fairer, more diverse, because the appointments process will change and will allow more diversity on the bench, so to speak. How do you respond to those kinds of claims?
All right, so let's start with the last one. We have 15 judges in the Supreme Court. I may count 7 of them as conservative, 8 as non-conservative, liberal. I think it's fair enough. It's a very good balance between them. And those conservative have been elected. By the way, judges are elected now. So there's no problem if you really want to, for example, to elect more judges that are conservative. What I think is that the government does not want conservative judges because they can have conservative judges, as Ayelet Shaked as Minister of Justice did, with no problem. And I think some of them are very good judges. And it's okay. We need this diversity. What you cannot do today is have the government's judges, the coalition judges. This you cannot. Orban, when he actually conquered the Supreme Court of Israel, the Supreme Court of Hungary, not of Israel, he said, I do not want conservative or liberal. I want my judges.
Yeah.
Okay? Judges that are loyal to the government. This is something that you cannot do in Israel.
It's interesting because Levine, I remember after the judges voted not to allow Derry to take his place as minister, including conservative judges who voted for that. And Levine said, I think the quote was that the Supreme Court is full of left-wing judges, and it's interesting because he's redefined left-wing to simply mean against the government.
Of course,
Left-wing just means opposing the government.
So this is the main problem. They want coalition judges, and therefore they want to take over the Supreme Court, and starting by the president of the Supreme Court. And this is something that in Israel, if you look at what Poland did and Hungary did, this is exactly the same way. First of all, you take, like I said, you take Manhattan, and then you take Berlin, like the song said. Here, first of all, you take the Supreme Court, and then everything you make, it comes very easy because you have nowhere to go. If you look at the countries today that are non-democratic, okay, I would not say dictatorships, but non-democratic, all of them have beautiful constitutions with amazing chapters of human rights, okay, that they're written there, and the constitution is a rigid constitution, but the citizens have nowhere to go. They cannot go to the court. There is no court that will actually give them the remedy they need, because the courts are, of course, or they do not exist, or they are courts of the government. And of course, you will not go to a court of the government to say that the government is harming your rights. So this is something that we should learn from what we said, the comparative aspect. And the first part of your question, there are many things that need to be changed in the court, I think. And I think the court, but I do not agree with the idea that the court is an activist court. When I hear this, I only ask my partner that is, okay, this is an activist court. I always say, okay, show me. Would you please give me the list of, okay, we have about 11,000 cases a year. Okay, would you give me the list of the activist cases that recently we have? Okay, I have 3. We'll say, okay, if you talk about 3 out of thousands, this is not an activist court, this is a minimalist court. So I do not see this great activism. The court was an activist court in Israel in the beginning and the first days of the state. And this is very important. And I think it's very interesting because Israel was born, let's say, it had no constitution. Okay, it was Israel's Declaration of Independence, although say we will have a constitution, but we didn't have it. So what did the court do? The Supreme Court, I think the most important contribution to the protection of what we say a liberal democracy is the protection the court gave to the human rights. The Supreme Court undertook the task to defend human rights and to create what in Israel became to be known as the Bill of Judicial Rights, meaning it's a set of human rights that have been protected by the court verdicts all over the years. And for example, the court ruled that the executive may not restrict human rights without relying on explicit legislation. This is an interpretation of the law, meaning that no individual right may be impaired, for example, without the explicit consent of the law. This is something very important, and actually it established the rule that in Israel, human rights may only be denied or limited with explicit consent of the legislature. And this is something that in a country without a constitution was very important. So I see the role of activism as something that was in the past, but we do not see many activist decisions nowadays.
That's very interesting. You referred to Hungary and Poland already, and I wonder, because we saw recently news that I think it was the deputy foreign minister of Poland said that the government had consulted with Poland on its judicial reform, which is a little concerning. And we also know, I think those of us who've been studying this for a while know that there are very good relations between Orban's party and Fidesz party in Hungary, and that he could. And I wonder, do is your reading that that the members of the government, I don't know, Yariv Levin, Simcha Rothman, others, are consciously trying to essentially recreate the situation in Hungary? I remember there was a quote from the Polish leader Kaczynski, who said that he wanted to see Budapest in Warsaw, meaning that he wanted Poland to become more like Hungary. Do you think that's what's happening, that they want to see Budapest in Jerusalem?
I cannot say anything about what they think. Right. I can only relate of what I see. And what I see is somebody is following the rules that were implemented in Hungary and in Poland. It's like you have a book, how to reign, how to be an or an illiberal democracy is the new name, illiberal democracy. What to do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're following the rules. We had in the Institute of Democracy where I work, we had 3 weeks ago, we had a visit of the former Minister of Justice in Ireland and former Canadian Minister of Justice, and 2 scholars, professor very well known from Poland and Hungary. And actually, one of our colleagues took them to see the demonstrations on Shabbat. And they were there with tears in their eyes. They could not believe it. And they said, we didn't see in our country this kind of demonstrations. Something in the spirit of democracy here tells us, the professors, that you will not follow the steps of Hungary and Poland. Something here is different. And they talked to us the day after about what they are seeing and, of course, what to do and what not to do. And they said the demonstrations in the street is something that did not happen in Poland. Yes, they went to the streets, but every part of every sector of society went to the street when the decisions, concerned this sector. But you didn't see, the rise of the liberal democrats in the country. We did not see it. And we hope that you succeed, because it will make us succeed perhaps in the future. It was fascinating, and it was really, it was not easy to hear them and to listen to them and what they are living through and what happened. And it happened so very quickly there. But Israel is different. And I think that what we're seeing today is something that tells me I am much more optimistic now concerning this reform than I was perhaps 2 months ago. I do not know what will be the results of what's going on in the president's house. I do not know, because there are talks, but I do not know if an arrangement, an agreement, a consensus agreement may come out of it. But I think that what we are seeing in the streets is the spirit of the Israelis saying, we will not become a state that is not democratic. We will fight for our democracy. And this is something incredible.
It's wonderful to hear that. Also, there was a conversation going on in one of the WhatsApp groups that we run about Yom Ha'atzmaut and how people are feeling in the run up to Yom Ha'atzmaut, and how they don't really feel, at least some people, I don't want to speak for everyone, but some people don't feel like celebrating Israel at 75 at this moment. But I think from what you're telling us, I think this is a way maybe that we can connect to our Zionism and our love of Israel, that we're celebrating what the protest movement says about the state of Israel and about what we've built here.
I agree with you, Paul, and it's very important. First of all, we took the flag, and it became something very important for us. I wouldn't have even imagined in the past that people from all over the sectors of Israel, people that are usually, they live in their houses and they are well-to-do and they have their work, and they speak about politics and, in the Shabbat with the family, and that's all. That they will take this project of fighting for a word that it's not known to everybody. Yeah. When I started talking about constitutional law, I think we were 5 people who understood actually. Now everybody talks about it. You know, you can hear 2 girls speaking over a coffee about the override clause. For me, it's incredible. And this is something so important for Israel. I think this is somebody lighted a fire that it will not be able to put down. And it's very important. This is a real something that we should celebrate. We have, all of us, all of these hundreds of thousands going to the streets, we have something in common. And it's not right or left or religious or non-religious. We see many people and nobody knows exactly who comes from where. And you see it in the polls. This reform has no approval, even from the parties that actually are part of government.
Yeah.
Okay, because they deal with the power of government. Nobody wants to live with an unlimited power of government. And I don't care which kind of government. I don't want the last government to be unlimited and neither this one. So this is the issue. So you have a reason to celebrate, I think.
Thank you very much. That's a wonderful message for all of our members. And one last question from me, and then I'm going to turn to the many questions we've got coming in. As you mentioned, we have this pause now in the legislative process, and the demonstrations are continuing as indeed they should. But I wanted to ask you, in your view, aside from the specifics of the judicial overhaul, what do you view as the main threats, if you do view other main threats to sort of Israel's liberal democratic character, values from this government? I mean, a lot of talk, for example, about the so-called National Guard and the fact that it would be under the directorship of one Itamar Ben-Gvir. Is that something that you would? What's your view of that? What's your view of some of the other messages that we're getting from this government about its values?
First of all, the National Guard, I do not see it forming, existing, passing the law, and passing the Supreme Court. Okay, it's a long way. We may talk perhaps then. It's a long way to go. And do not forget that Israel, the court has already declared that a private prison is not possible in Israel because it's infringed upon human rights. So to have a prison that is private, which is, of course, well known in the USA, but in Israel it's forbidden, then it will be possible to have a private police for a minister. I do not see it happening yet. I have to see what the Attorney General's opinion will be on that. What kind of law will be enacted? You need to do it by law, and if this law will be a constitutional law or may be declared by the Supreme Court an unconstitutional law. So you have a series of things coming on following the idea to have a National Guard. I think that the problem of Israel that we are now seeing it very clearly is the fragile democratic structure, meaning that if 61 is absolute power, then we should amend that. We should actually entrench the basic laws that, in order that only a great majority of 80 or 90 will be able to amend it and not a simple majority. Imagine what happened, I think 2 or 3 governments before, when Gantz and Netanyahu decided to form a government. They said, okay, we will have a 2-headed government. Okay, what kind of idea is that? I would laugh if it wasn't in my country. They needed 36 hours in order to pass a law saying that yes, in the basic law, the government we will have not only a 2-headed government, but the possibility to have many prime ministers. I say, why 2? Why only 2? Why not 3 or 4? Each of them will have 1 year. It's amazing. The possibility does not exist in any other country, only in Israel. So this is something that I think we must amend. And this is at least the rules of the game. It's like, the rules of the game for football and soccer and tennis, and nobody is if they have to change it, I think they're trying to change something about the white clothes in Wimbledon, but it will take them about 400 years. In Israel, to change something like this, it's a matter of days in order to change the rules of the game of the government. And this is something that we must, and now the people understand what's going on. And I think this is something, this will be perhaps one of the outcomes of this reform or of this period that we are living at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. So there are a few questions. There are a couple of questions about the Constitution, Bill of Rights. I want to sort of combine them into one question and ask you. You've mentioned about this idea of entrenching the basic laws, making them much harder to amend, and presumably also to pass. To create new basic laws would also be more difficult than just creating.
We only need two in order to finish the Constitution. We need only two more basic laws, and the Constitution is finished. And we need to declare a Constitution.
Then it's a Constitution. Can you explain more?
Yes, one is the basic law on the legislature, meaning that the basic law that we still are waiting to have is the basic law that would say that all the basic laws have constitutional power, constitutional status, and that the Supreme Court will be able to make judicial review. This is a law that it's called Chok Yesod HaChakika, and they are dealing with it also at the President House. And the second one is the basic law on human rights. We have only two very small basic laws dealing with human rights. We need the whole charter, the whole Bill of Rights.
Right.
And for me, that's all. We have the basic laws, Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, which is and the Declaration of Independence at the beginning, and the Constitution is ready.
Interesting. Okay, so maybe that could be the happy outcome of this difficult chapter
at the centenary of Israel, 100.
Yeah, that well maybe. So okay, thank you for that. Actually, that answered a couple of questions that we had here. There was a question from Paul, my fellow Paul on the in the group, Paul Mirbach, who says he mentioned that Bezalel Smotrich related to the news that Moody's, the credit ratings company, had downgraded Israel's credit rating, and he said that they may know numbers, but they're not experts in constitutional law. Since you are an expert in constitutional law, how would you respond to Smotrich about what Moody's have announced today?
I think that Smotrich understands exactly what Moody's did, but it's a way of we are living in a period where there is no real difference between truth and false and fake and real. So, and that's a problem. We are all the time dealing with the fact checker, whether this is true or not. I think that he understands exactly the problem, and the only reason that it was not further stronger, the Moody's decision, is that they took for them it was very important to understand what is going on in the streets, and they said that because of the demonstrations and the power and the force that this demonstration had, they do not really fear for Israel's democracy. So the demonstrations were the only reason that it was only a slight downgrade from Israel's economy, and not more than that. But of course, they omit in every this day. I read all the declarations they did concerning Moody's, and this sentence from the Moody's opinion was deleted. Okay, half through is, I think, worse than a lie.
Interesting. Here's a quite interesting question here from Miri, who she mentions the Kohelet forum, the think tank that's been very influential on these issues. And there's a couple of questions in here actually. One is that the Kohelet themselves and the leadership of Kohelet have actually said that they think that the government is going too far in certain things. So there was I think specifically on the override clause, and that the eventual reforms should be moderated from where they are now. So one question is, why do you think this statement or opinion from the Kohelet has not had more of an impact on what Levine and Rothman are doing. And the other question is why it isn't, in the words of the questioner, why isn't it a bigger scandal that an unelected think tank seems to be the engine for these non-democratic changes?
First of all, there is a scandal. I think the power of Kohelet was working in the shadow, and now it's not in the shadow anymore. Everybody knows what they're doing, who's funding them, what is the project, what are the purposes, and this is very important for them. And I think that's the reason why they said, okay, we didn't mean that. We went perhaps too far. They were working and nobody knew about them. Nobody knew what's going on, which kind of ideas they had. But they are the father and the mother of the reform. And what is interesting, I think, for the audience is to know that the Likud has sent to the President House as a delegate of the Likud, of the coalition, the legal expert from Kohelet. He's there. He is the one negotiating. So to the first part of the question, whether it will go down, it will be, something not so extreme, we will know. Yeah. Okay, from the outcome of these talks.
Interesting. Okay. I think I'm right in saying that Kohelet were also instrumental in the drafting of the nation state law, or they were involved in. Yeah.
Yes. Well, the nation state law is a very good law for what there is inside, but the problem is what they omitted.
What they omitted, of course. Yeah.
Okay. And not. I think it's a very important law. It's it's the Anima Amin. It's the credo of Israel.
Yes.
We are the nation state of a Jewish people. It's something, yes. Okay, so it's very important to write it in a basic law, but we should not have omitted the principle of democracy, the principle of equality.
Equality, yeah.
At least, you can say this is the Jewish state, but this is also the home for all its citizens. At least, say the home of all its citizens. You don't have to even talk about minorities if it's problematic for you. And of course, they omitted the Declaration of Independence. I think these three omissions are were very problematic, but the Supreme Court said, we see them, which is very important. This is a very activistic decision, actually. They said, okay, we will not interfere with the basic law nation state, but we see equality, and we see the Declaration of Independence, and we see, of course, the idea of democracy, that it's all there in the basic laws. And this new basic law does not infringe upon them. That's
right. That's very interesting. Okay. And specifically, we're talking about the basic laws that I discussed with Dan Meridor 3 weeks ago. Okay. Here's a question from Emma. She says, how would you respond to the claim that the judiciary in the past has fought against any reforms whatsoever, that it has prevented itself, it's fought back against any attempt at reform, and therefore the court itself has contributed to the present situation?
I am not, first of all, I want to know why Emma asked this kind of question. What kind of reform was presented and the court fought against it? I want to know the facts. I'm sorry about that. But for me, especially in these days, facts are very important.
Yes.
I know that the court decided not to elect several people because of several reasons that may be wrong reasons to the Supreme Court. But this is not reform. Okay? Yeah. The court did not, Ruth Gavizon, for example, and Neely Cohen, they were candidates for the Supreme Court, and the court actually did not nominate them. So this is perhaps wrong decision. But this is not a fight against reforms. If the reforms were the reforms, I don't know what kind of reforms are you talking about, or are you asking? So if you are more specific, I would gladly.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. Yeah, I think to be fair to Emma, I assume that these are claims that have been thrown at her when she's been debating these things.
But this is the problem we are hearing all the time.
Yes.
And I ask you all, before you say, okay, the court did that, and the court does not support the religious, and does not support the Haredim. And I say, okay, let's talk about the fact. Who is the one to protect the Haredim from last finance minister Lieberman and his decisions concerning the Supreme Court of Israel? And so the facts are very important, and we are under, an attack of fake facts in order to promote this reform, which I think for the common people, for people that are not specialists in it seems okay. They say so. So if a politician says so, then it must be right. We are not there anymore. I'm sorry, and for me it's very difficult to fight against things that are not, true.
Fair enough. Okay, here's to counter that. Here's a very specific question from Elizabeth, who says, what human rights do you see as important to include in a basic law for human rights? Because as we learned from Dan Meridor, the eventual law that was passed was a bit of a kind of compromise, human dignity and freedom of occupation. So it didn't really deal with the specifics of the rights that were that Dan Meridor and others, Damnon Rubinstein and others wanted to pass. What would you include in a basic law for human rights?
First, equality, and second, equality, and third, also equality. And then we may speak about, of course, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom from religion, meaning that, but the principle of equality in Israel is not there. And it's something that I think we are 75 years old now, the country is. I think it's about time that we stood up and said, you cannot discriminate women, and you cannot discriminate the Lahatab, the lesbian, I don't know the name.
LGBT, yeah.
Okay. And you cannot discriminate the Arabs. The idea of discrimination, the Jewish people, we have suffered enough from the idea of racism and discrimination. This should be the first principle upon our basic laws. It is written in the Declaration of Independence, but we have not written it in a basic law. So I would start with equality, the principle of equality and the prohibition to discriminate. And not equal, but separate. Equal, not equal, but separate.
Right. So that actually leads me to there's a question here. It's a statement really, but I'm going to interpret a question behind the statement by Ofra, who she says, and I think this was in response to your point earlier about how the demonstrations have attracted people from all across Israeli society. She says, no Haredim on the streets. And I don't know whether she's right in that, but certainly they're not prominent in the streets. Let's say that. And where I want to go with that is the presence of a significant population in Israel, and a growing population in Israel, let's be clear about it, that I think would have different views on some of these issues around equality. And I'm not trying to be critical, just as a statement of fact. No. The way their society works has a very different view on roles of men and women, for example. And certainly on gay rights as well. So how would that fit in with the future Israel that we're talking about, with a basic law of human rights where equality is at the heart of it? It's
a great question, Paul. First of all, no Haredim in the demonstrations, because Haredim go to demonstrations only if the rabbis said so. So the rabbis did not say to go to demonstrations. They do not allow. They follow the rabbi's orders. When the rabbi says you must go, and there was a demonstration, I think in 1999, against the Supreme Court because of an order of the Supreme Court. So all the surroundings of Jerusalem, the Supreme Court, were all black from Haredim, because the rabbi said you should go. But it's very interesting to note that the Haredim do not go also to the other demonstrations that the coalition is trying. Okay? They're very quiet in this dispute. Yeah. I think they understand finally that this is a dispute that may harm them and their situation in the in politics in Israel. So you do not hear a word from the Haredim. And as of the principle of equality, Israel is a Jewish and democratic state. This is our basic principle, meaning that you need a compromise. We will never be 100% Jewish, and we will never be 100% democratic. We will need to have a balance. Not all my rights will be protected 100% because I will not be able to drive my car in Bnei Brak on Shabbat. And I will not do it, not because somebody will tell me no, because this is the way I understand, and I will not go into Mea Shearim without wearing a jacket. I cannot even imagine this idea. This is, we have to live together, so you need a compromise. Equality, I know it will not be 100%, and I know that we will need for a compromise dealing with the Haredim on the principles and on some of the basic laws. We know that, but it's okay with me. I understand that, okay? But on the other side, as I understand their religious needs, they have to understand the democratic ideas. And for me, the lack of the basic study, of the basic civic studies, is a huge problem in Israel. We're talking and we're demonstrating about words and principles and ideas that they do not understand.
Yeah.
And even if they do not agree with them, I am okay with that. But they should understand in order to say, okay, I understand it, I know what it means, but still I follow my rabbi, like the Jews in the US do, exactly like the Haredim living outside the Israel do. They understand the rules of the game and where are they living and the pros and cons and what is legal and illegal, and they understand the principles of the democracy in the US, and still they live according to their rules. It's okay with me. But in Israel, it's only religious studies, and this is one problem that we will have to deal with.
Indeed. There's important pushback here that I want to read out from Shulamit Magnus, who says that at the Jerusalem demonstrations, there have been Haredi participants, including as speakers at those demonstrations. So that's
I haven't been in Jerusalem, and for me this is new because I am part of this organization. I haven't read that, and thank you for this piece of knowledge. I will look for that because it's important for me, even if there are small minority is important for me.
Yeah. Oh, Yofi. Okay. Here's a nice, as we say, tachlis question from Linda Levine. She says, if the talks fail and they pass the laws, is the Supreme Court says they are illegal, what happens then?
Well, I'm Israeli, but I'm not a prophet, and you are all made aliyah, but none of you are prophets. So this is, I think, the question, the $1 million question. In Israel, we have the idea of, I think it's called an unconstitutional constitutional amendment, meaning that the Supreme Court has stated that there are basic constitutional principles that limit the Knesset, and the basic principles that limit the Knesset powers is the principle of a Jewish and democratic state. So actually, the Supreme Court of Israel may strike down this reform. What will happen the next day? I do not know. The government may decide to follow the judicial decision, because for me, this is the only option. Right. Because if you have a judicial decision, it means that this is the law.
Yes.
This is the law. And if this is the law, and you are a state ruled by the rule of law, then the government must follow it. So I don't see any other option. But if the government does not follow it, then we are in a constitutional chaos where neither you and Emma and all the Linda and all the persons that pose the question will not have to follow the law. If the government doesn't follow it, why should I? Why should I pay my taxes and follow the law and go to the court, etc., etc.? So I do not want to be in this situation. I guess that the government will say, okay, we told you that we have a problem in the court, but they will follow it. I think it will be a very good escape for Netanyahu. I'm not sure that he really wants this judicial overhaul on his shoulders. This is my feeling.
I mean, does he, just on that, I mean, I think we've been led to believe at certain times that for Netanyahu, his agenda is a personal agenda regarding his own problems. But would this overhaul actually help him? How conceivably could it help?
Well, it may help him if the reform passes a law. It will be able to pass a law saying that the prime minister not what we call the French law.
French law.
Okay. Or, for example, to change the attorney general into a new head of the prosecution, and the new head of the prosecution would say that the court should stop their proceedings because there is no reason to go further on, and then Netanyahu will be actually declared innocent. So it may, but it will take time, and I hope that these are not, the real motives under this reform. And I know that we are in a problematic situation. I do not know of any other democratic country where a prime minister indicted of corruption is a prime minister serving.
Yeah.
And this is something wrong with our, our political culture, not political rules.
Yes, I agree.
But I'm not sure he really wants it. I think that he would like to be remembered as different and not as the one that brought down, Israel's democracy.
We should certainly hope that's the case. Paul Mirbach, you meant, we actually kind of follows nicely on from that, because he's talking about the reasons for these reforms. I mean, we can only speculate, obviously, as to what's in the minds of various players in the government. But Paul says there are about 140 laws waiting to be passed once the Supreme Court is out of the way. Do we have any legal tools to resist these laws if the reform laws do pass? And could they, for example, pass a law to disqualify parties in elections?
First of all, it's a very important question, and I think that you know already the answer, because this was the beginning of our talk. 61 is absolute power unless you have the Supreme Court. So if you do not have the Supreme Court, we will have elections perhaps, but it will be elections like Syria used to have, okay, or elections where you cannot change the leader, because we will have a disqualification of all the Arab parties claiming that they are terrorists, and nobody will be at the Supreme Court to say otherwise. And you may change also the rules of the game. Why should we have elections every 4 years? If we may change also, perhaps not we may change the principle of equality before the elections. Only certain citizens may go to court to elect, to vote, etc. So everything is possible. And this is really, what shall we do? We have only one, one outcome. And this is what we're doing. We're going to the streets. And we go into the streets every week. And it's something unusual, incredible, amazing. And I hold to that it will actually be our way out of this situation. I believe in what we're seeing. It's like, it's like you need in an electric car to plug yourself, to plug the car in the electricity in order to function. I go every Saturday evening for the last, and I missed only once because I was not here. And it's like I plug myself to the electricity and I have all the power for all the week to work 24/7 around this what's going on with the reforms, also at the presidents and etc. and other places. So I see this is our only way out, really.
Okay, Professor Suzie Navot, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure. Welcome to Israel to all of you. Enjoy. It's a marvelous country.
I should tell you that I just got a message from one of our group who just said Suzie for PM, Suzie for Prime Minister. So I don't know whether that's advice you're planning to take, but
no, thank you.
But I do want to thank you very much, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. There was one question about how people can see a recording of this. We will be putting out the recording on our Facebook page, and also if you email us on infodemocracy@gmail.com. we can send you that as well if you're not on our WhatsApp groups already, where it will certainly be posted. So thank you, Professor Navot, very much. Thank you, everyone.
A pleasure.
I wish everyone a meaningful couple of weeks in these national days that are approaching, and I think we should all take Suzie Navot's advice that this is the Yom Ha'atzmaut is a time to celebrate what we are doing as Israelis and what we are doing representing the Zionist vision of a Jewish and democratic state. So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.